The first snow came early that year, drifting down from a sky the color of pewter, falling quietly over the roofs and chimneys of Brienne, a small French village nestled between the white hills. The sound of the world softened under its touch. Horses' hooves no longer echoed on the cobblestones, and even the church bell seemed to hesitate before ringing. In a narrow lane stood a shop with faded blue shutters and a sign that read Henri Duval, horloger. Behind the frosted window, 1,000 clocks watched the snow descend. One, an enormous brass pendulum clock, moved with such grace the villagers said it kept time with the human heart. Inside, the air smelled of oil and pine shavings. Henri Duval sat hunched beneath the glow of a lamp, a magnifying lens before one eye. For nearly 50 years he had repaired every clock in Brienne, keeping time for those who remained. To him, every tick was a heartbeat in the great body of the village. That night, as the snow deepened, Henri felt a strange stillness. He set down his tools and gazed at the brass clock. Its pendulum swayed like a slow breath. He sighed. Always on time. He reached for his coat and stepped outside. The street was empty. He had not spoken to anyone all day. As he turned to go back inside, he noticed something strange. In the window, one clock was glowing faintly, a silver shimmer, like moonlight caught in glass. He blinked, and the glow was gone. Chuckling softly, he told himself, "Old eyes." But back in the shop, the air felt different, colder. He found the source of the light, a small carriage clock with a cracked face. He didn't remember placing it there. Its dial was painted with tiny winter scenes. The second hand was moving backward. "That's impossible," he whispered. He tried to wind it, but the key resisted, making a sound like slow, uneven breathing. Then the clock hummed. A vibration trembled through the air and into Henri's chest. The painted girl on the dial seemed to move. Her lantern flickered. She turned, looking directly at him. The workshop light dimmed, and for a moment he saw snow falling inside the clock. Then silence. The ticking stopped. Henri leaned closer, and something about the girl's face unsettled him. It looked familiar. He hurried to his workbench and opened a drawer. There, among drawings of gears, was a charcoal portrait. A woman's face, delicate and smiling. Her name was Elise. Henri's hand trembled. The girl on the clock had Elise's eyes. He had loved her 40 years ago, but the years had carried her away. He thought he had buried her memory long ago. Yet here she was, in the face of a clock that shouldn't exist. He wound it once more, and this time it began to tick. The sound was soft, like footsteps in snow. One by one, the other clocks in the shop joined in, aligning their rhythm to the mysterious beat. The carriage clock glowed again, brighter now. The girl's lantern shone so strongly that its light spilled onto the wall, painting a path of gold toward the door. Henri followed it. When he reached the door, the light pooled at his feet, and for a heartbeat, he saw real snow swirling inside the glow. Then he was no longer in his shop. He stood in the middle of Brienne Square, but it was not the same. The bakery was open, laughter echoing from within. Gas lamps burned warmly. Henri looked at his hands. They were young again. A clock struck 12. He turned and saw her, Elise, standing beneath the lamplight, her hair shimmering with snow. She smiled, just as she had 40 years before. "Henri," she said softly, "you're late again." His throat tightened. "Elise, is it really you?" She laughed, a sound like crystal chimes. Who else would it be? She took his hand, and together they walked. For a while, Henri forgot everything but the rhythm of her voice and the way snow melted on her eyelashes. Then the church bell rang again, 13 times. The sound was wrong. Elise turned, her smile fading. "Time," she whispered, "is not what it was." The world around them shimmered. The lamps flickered. Henri reached for her, but his hand passed through her arm as if through mist. "Elise!" he cried. Her voice came faintly. "Wake, Henri! Wake before the snow stops falling." The world collapsed into white. When he opened his eyes, he was back in his chair. The workshop was silent. The carriage clock sat before him, dark once more. The painted girl was gone. Only the lantern remained, a tiny speck of gold. At dawn, the church bell rang. Henri rose, wound the brass clock, and listened to its steady heartbeat. He set the carriage clock on the mantel beside the portrait of Elise. Though it did not tick, Henri fancied he could hear a faint breath within it. That morning, he sat by the window, watching the snow fall. In his lap rested the silent clock, glowing softly with the color of dawn. Outside, Brienne stirred awake, unaware that for one winter night, time itself had stopped and dreamt, alongside a lonely clockmaker whose heart still kept perfect time. Thank you so much for joining me on this magical journey through time. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a like and don't forget to subscribe for more tales that touch the heart. See you next time. The snow had stopped falling, leaving the village of Brienne wrapped in a soft, white silence. Inside his little shop, filled with the scent of oil and pine, Henri Duval, the clockmaker, awoke in his chair. He'd fallen asleep holding a small carriage clock. As dawn broke, scattering rainbows through the frosted window, he blinked, wondering if the night before had been a dream. He turned the clock over. It was cold and still. But for a fleeting moment he thought he saw something move behind the painted glass, the faint flicker of a lantern. "Dreams," he murmured with a sad smile. "Always the tricksters." Yet, the dream had changed him. It had loosened a knot of loneliness that had been tied for years. For the first time, he didn't feel entirely alone. He placed the clock on the mantel, next to a portrait of his long-lost love, Elise. "You always had a way of returning unexpectedly," he whispered. Just then, the grand clock by the door chimed 7. Henri stretched, opened the shutters, and let the light flood in. He brewed his coffee, and as he sipped by the window, he saw it. The reflection of the little carriage clock flickered as if its lantern glowed again. He turned, but the light was gone. Later that morning, the postman, Lucien, brought a small parcel. "From Paris," he said cheerfully. Henri was puzzled. He hadn't ordered anything. Inside was a velvet box. He opened it to find a stunning silver pocket watch, engraved with snowflakes and stars. As he opened the lid, a faint lullaby played, a tune he hadn't heard in decades, and etched inside was a single word: Elise. His hands trembled. It was the melody she used to hum as she passed his shop all those years ago. How could this be? Elise was gone. He sat down, his heart fluttering. He looked at the mantel, and the carriage clock seemed to gleam in response. He placed both clocks side by side on his workbench. Inside the back of the pocket watch he found another engraving, a tiny snowdrop flower, and beneath it, 2 initials, H and E. As he traced them, the melody stopped. Then a sound so soft it could have been his imagination, a whisper, like breath on glass. "Henri." He looked up. The room was empty. A fragile miracle hung in the air, and he sat perfectly still, afraid to break the spell. Tears welled in his eyes. "If this is a dream," he whispered, "then let me never wake." That night, as snow began to fall again, the lullaby drifted through the air, even though the watch was closed. Henri looked up. The carriage clock on the mantel was glowing, soft and golden. Inside its painted face, a girl with a lantern was walking across a frozen river. She paused, turned toward him, and lifted her light. A whisper seemed to reach him. "Do not be afraid of the time that passes. It is only love moving through the hours." The image faded, but a warmth filled his chest. "You always spoke in riddles, Elise." He smiled through his tears. In the days that followed, the villagers noticed a change in Henri. He seemed lighter, happier. He even whistled on his way to the bakery. One evening he found small footprints in the fresh snow outside his shop. They led to the town's frozen fountain. There, in the center, lay a single, impossibly fresh sprig of lilac. He knelt and picked it up. "So," he murmured, "you're still watching the clocks." He took it home and placed it beside Elise's portrait. That night, the carriage clock glowed brighter than ever before, its ticking as soft as breathing. He felt a presence in the room, a voice in the air saying, "You have waited long enough. Now, let the hours rest." "Yes," he whispered, "it's time." The lantern flared brilliantly, and for an instant he saw her face, smiling, radiant, eternal. The glow faded, leaving only the gentle tick of a heart at peace. The clock never glowed like that again, but Henri no longer feared the passing hours. They were companions now. Winter melted away, and the old clockmaker, who had spent a lifetime measuring moments, finally learned to measure them by the warmth of memory. Winter held on tight that year in Brienne. February had come and gone, but frost still painted the windows each morning, and the river was still wrapped in a thin sheet of ice. The villagers called it a stubborn season, one that refused to let go. But inside the clockmaker's little shop, warmth always lingered. Henri Duval had found a quiet, gentle rhythm. He would rise with the dawn, wind his clocks, brew his coffee, and open his shutters to the sleeping town square. Each day brought a soft joy, as if time itself had slowed down just for him. The mysterious carriage clock still sat on his mantelpiece, its cracked glass faintly glimmering in the pale light. It no longer glowed at night, but Henri could feel its presence, a silent companion that filled the empty spaces between the ticks and talks. He even spoke to it sometimes. "Do you remember the first snow?" he'd ask, polishing its brass edges. "It was as thick as wool that night." And though it never answered, he felt a gentle hum in his chest as if it was saying, "I remember." The village had grown used to the old man's window glowing long after sunset. Sometimes the baker's wife would pause outside when the church bell struck 9. From within she could hear a soft melody, a lullaby from a hidden music box, as if the clocks themselves were singing to him. It was Henri's secret, a bridge between his past and his present. One morning he received another letter, this time on cream paper with a blue wax seal. The handwriting was delicate, unfamiliar. It read, "Monsieur Duval, you may not remember me. My mother was Élise Cloutier. She often spoke of Brienne, and of a kind man who repaired the school clock. She kept your sketches her whole life. When she passed, I found them with a note for you. It simply said, 'He will understand.'" Henri's hand trembled. Élise. She had remembered him all this time. He opened the drawer where he kept the carriage clock's key. Next to it lay a small dried lilac sprig. He smiled faintly. "So, you did send her my way again," he murmured. That evening, as snow began to fall once more, Henri placed the carriage clock on his workbench. "I think I understand now," he said softly. He wound the clock one last time. The key turned smoothly, and the ticking began. Not a crisp, metallic sound, but a warm, rhythmic pulse, like a heartbeat. The other clocks answered, their voices merging into one harmonious breath. Then the scent of lilac filled the air, stronger than ever. The lamplight flickered, but Henri felt only calm. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, the workshop was gone. He stood in a field of snow under a sky filled with dancing green and violet lights. A path of golden snowflakes led toward a forest of silver trees. And walking toward him was a woman in a blue coat, holding a lantern. "Élise," he whispered. She smiled. "You kept time for me," she said. "I tried," he replied, "but the clocks were never quite right." "They were enough," she said, taking his hand. "Time doesn't need to be perfect, only remembered." They walked together beneath the aurora. "Is this a dream?" he asked. She laughed softly. "Everything that is loved becomes a dream eventually. In a clearing stood an enormous clock tower, its hands marking not hours, but moments. "You see, Henri," she said, "every heartbeat you ever tended still moves here. Nothing is lost." The great clock chimed, not in metal, but in pure color. Henri felt the years fall away. He was young again, with the woman he had loved more than time itself. When the chime faded, he was back in his chair by the fire. The letter was on his lap. The snow had stopped, and dawn was breaking. He hadn't truly left the dream, but brought a piece of it back. He took his own pocket watch and placed it beside the carriage clock. "Rest now," he whispered. Then he wrote a note to Elise's daughter. "Thank you. Please know she was remembered with every hour I lived. The clocks are yours if you wish them. They keep more than time." That night, Brienne was silent. Henri sat by the fire, his eyes growing heavy. As sleep drew near, he heard Elise's voice, soft as the turning of a key. "Come home, Henri." He smiled, leaned back, and let the rhythm of the clocks carry him away. The next morning, the light was still on in his shop. Inside, it was peaceful. All the clocks had stopped at precisely midnight. On the mantel, the carriage clock's glass was no longer cracked, its light glowing softly, eternally. The villagers would later say that during the winter of 1933, time itself paused to dream with an old clockmaker, and somewhere beyond the hours, he and his Elise still walked together, in a land where every tick is the echo of a love that endures. Thank you for listening to this story. If it touched your heart, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more tales that explore the magic in our world. See you next time.